Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads. For this week's episode, we're going to be talking about all of the High Republic Phase 3 comics, giving you our final wrap-up in the High Republic Phase 3. Make sure you check out our tier list for the High Republic Phase 3 books, as well as the comic tier list, and check out our High Republic Phase 3 timeline. It has everything from Phase 3 as well as the other phases. Make sure you check out that video as well. Give us a like on this video if you haven't already. Helps our channel out a lot, and subscribe for more content just like this. We are going to be ranking and giving you our review for 10 of the High Republic Phase 3 comics. We kind of combined a few things together here, but we're going to give you our thoughts and a score out of 5, as we always do, and then tell you where amongst these 10 titles each one of these would rank. So we're going to start off here with Shadows of Starlight, which was kind of our soft launch for Phase 3. It came out with the short story anthology as well, Tales of Light and Life, kind of right in between Phase 2, Phase 3. And this miniseries was written by Charles Soule, and it tells a few snapshots of what it was like in the year or so post the fall of Starlight Beacon. And I really did enjoy this series. Charles Soule has a good handle on these stories, of course. I mean, he's one of the authors who founded the High Republic, and he does a really great job crafting the narrative here. My favorite stories were for sure the Aslan and Yoda stories, as well as the one with Buryaga and Bell. I thought those all worked really well and are actually pretty important for setting up the rest of the stories from Phase 3, especially that Yoda story, where it really starts Aslan's journey and shows you the way the Jedi Order is kind of second guessing who he is and what his value will be amongst this mission to stop the Nameless. So I thought I did a great job of introducing Aslan into the main High Republic Phase 1 and 3 continuities. As for flaws with this story, I don't have too many. I think it could have been a little bit longer. Each story is a little bit of a standalone chapter, and I would have maybe liked to see a few more play out between them, but I really enjoyed this miniseries. One of my favorites of the entirety of Phase 3. I'd give it a 3.75 out of 5, and I've ranked it number 2 out of all of the High Republic Phase 3 comics for me.
Yeah, I have a lot of great thoughts on Shadows of Starlight. It was a great way to reintroduce us to the conflict after jumping back in time for Phase 2, kind of setting the stage for everything between Phase 1 and Phase 3. It's very important because, like you were mentioning, Aslan is a character that really plays a big role here, and you can understand a little bit more about Master Yoda and the Jedi are trying to do with him as a Phase 2 character that somehow lived for so long, and it could be a clue to defeating the Nile and understanding the way to defeat the Nameless. I also was a fan of the Bell and Buryaga one. I was also a fan of the Avar, Chris, and Elzar one. Overall, I mean, Soul, I think, really lands everything quite well for me. My one critique that I would have for it is I found some of the art to be a little inconsistent. I think this is kind of where you start getting the Elzar man looks different every single issue for every single artist, every single story kind of syndrome that begins. But overall, I had a good time reading this. It definitely got me excited along with Tales of Light and Life. It was nice to get a little peeks and windows into everything that's happening with these characters who are stuck behind the Occlusion Zone. So overall, I give it a 3.75 as well. For where I would rank Shadows of Starlight, I would have it as my 2 out of 10 for my comics. Next up, we have the Marvel, The High Republic Phase 3 mainline, written by Kevin Scott. Overall, I thought it was pretty solid. There's a strong focus on Keeve as a character. It doesn't really run into that same issue that you have in Phase 1, where you kind of have characters like Avar Chris come into the story, come out of the story, kind of feel like they've been ripped away from their primary medium. These are comic exclusive or comic majority characters that felt like they were built off of everything, and this is just more of like one continuous story about Keeve's efforts about penetrating into the Occlusion Zone with Tarek, with Sarek. It's nice having little additions of characters like Tay, Sarek being a bit of a standout in the Phase 2 Marvel line, so kind of seeing Tay be a bit more of a character, see what it's like for him to live for so long. I thought Lorna also got some pretty solid storytelling here, and overall it was nice to just see everybody engage with not just the losses from Phase 1, but sort of how they're transforming, how the war against the Nile has shaped them and made them question everything about their morality, their judgment, and what comes next for where they are in the galaxy. And I thought that was quite solid. I wish that there was a little bit more of like a conclusive end to this story. It's kind of begging you to read the audio drama Tempest Breaker and listen to that before jumping into the Fear of the Jedi. Being a completionist, that was totally fine for me, but I want every medium to kind of stand on its own, and that's kind of been a problem throughout the High Republic. Sometimes things being too interconnected to the point that nothing's really standing on its own sometimes. But regardless, I would still give this a 3.5 out of 5, and I had this as my number 3 on my High Republic Phase 3 comics.
This is a series that I'm very mixed on because overall I thought the quality of it is pretty good. There are great arcs for characters like Keeve and for Skier and for Tay, who does make a triumphant return in this, and I really like Tay's appearance. My biggest problem with this for sure is the fact that it's not a complete story. It just ends on a cliffhanger, and then it asks comic readers to jump into a brand new medium that's completely different from the one they're reading and listen to an audio drama to hear all of the things that are going to be paid off from this series when you really should have gotten it paid off here. So I kind of have just an issue with the way the High Republic approached comic books in general. Comics always got the short end of the stick. They rarely gave any significant story, and even when they had characters like Keeve and Skier, who remained pretty much comic only characters, their big plot points and big character arcs aren't even resolved in the comic books. They're resolved in something else. I find that kind of insulting as a comic book reader, but in general, this is a fairly good series if you are going to be reading everything. If you're not, I feel like this will be pretty hollow. So if you haven't read this yet, I think you're going to really not find too much enjoyment when you read it till the end and then jump to the next miniseries and get basically no answers for what happened at the end of this one. So I'm very mixed on this because I think the series overall is higher than the score I'm going to give it, but the way it just ends without any answers ever, unless you listen to the audio drama, really rubs me the wrong way. So I'm going to give this a 2.5 out of 5, and it is my 8th out of 10 on my rankings of the High Republic Phase 3 comics. Next up, we have Phase 3 Adventures, written by Daniel Jose Older, and this is another series that was very disappointing for me. The Phase 1 adventures were so good, really surprising how good those were, and then Phase 2 was not good. I did not like Phase 2 really at all, and Phase 3 kind of piggybacked on Phase 2. I did not like this series. I thought it took really about 12 to 14 issues for this to get going. In this ranking spot, we're going to include the annual and the wedding issue and the Battle of Iriadu. And the wedding issue and the Battle of Iriadu are two of the better issues. When you tie into this whole thing, really from the wedding on, the story starts to pick up. Once you finally get to Battle of Iriadu, the story starts to actually get a little more interesting. But there are things that happen in this that just feel so jumbled and so messy. The series starts out with Lula losing her memory. There's no real consequences for that. She immediately remembers who she is, and she remembers all her friends and remembers everybody, and she drops out of the Jedi Order, and all these things are happening, but they happen so fast. It's such an abrupt series. Felt like it had no plan until you got to issue number 14 or 15 when it tied into the larger initiative. So for me, I really did not like the series. I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5, and it's my 9th favorite out of 10 for the High Republic Phase 3 comics.
Yeah, I have a mostly soft spot with these characters, especially because of how well Phase 1 was handled in the High Republic Adventures. Like Liam was saying, was a big surprise to us. The same issues kind of came up at the very end there. It did rely on Midnight Horizon, which, that's a nice YA book to read, but is that necessarily the same audience as kids reading these specific comics? We don't really run into that issue here. It's just the High Republic Adventures has a lot of spin-off material. You're probably going to go for that Wedding Spectacular. You probably are going to read Battle of Ariadu. Overall, there's a lot of stops and starts. It does feel like that first arc with Lula, even though she was never the best character in Phase 1, she still had something pretty interesting going on with Zine, and then another foil with Crix there to kind of play off of as like a tertiary character. You don't really have that here. She has everything kind of with Zine resolved super quickly, and then you're kind of playing a waiting game because you realize the story's ahead of everything going on with the Occlusion Zone. There's an entire issue where they're literally playing grab ball, and stuff like that was pretty annoying, but there were still interesting things like for Fala and getting to know State of Him and all these other Jedi that were presumed dead or MIA from Starlight Beacon. I found the Warden was pretty solid to start, and then he just became pretty comedic and childish, and then you kind of had to tie him in with Genovese at the very end, and a little too late for some of that storytelling to really hit hard and hit at home. But once they're fully on Ariadu, once they're actually playing against the Nile a bit more, once the Tarkin family comes in, once the wedding takes place finally, it does become a much more enticing read for me. All these sort of forgotten characters get a chance to interact with this main crew that's grown older, that's jumping around and trying to do their best. I thought all of that was still pretty solid. I did like this battle kind of fully fleshed out visually in a way that we don't really get to because of the adult novel format, because of everything else that it's kind of depicted in. I also found just the Battle of Ariadu issue with its tie-ins with everything going on in the junior novels pretty good of a conclusion for Gavi and Drigid, and visually one of the better looking issues overall, even including the Wedding Spectacular. So all that said, I give this a 3 out of 5, and for me this comes in as my number 7 on this list. Next up, we have Crash Landing and Crash and Burn one-shots. Honestly, I don't really have a lot of positives to say here. This does deal with Crash and her crew that we we were first introduced to in Midnight Horizon. It's nice to kind of get like book exclusive characters that don't seem super important, that don't really necessarily have huge galactical consequences, kind of continue on in storytelling. But this was a bit of a waste. I would have rather them have been folded in properly into the adventures line. And they do actually have several appearances before even getting to the Battle of Ariado fully playing out. But Crash Landing, I just did not like the art at all. I think it was just so rough, so bad. It's some of the worst comic art I've ever seen, unfortunately. Crash and Burn looks a lot better. But for me, my disappointment was that I think there was a decent story going around with Crix and everything going on with Crash and her crew. And I thought all of that stuff actually had potential. And I thought a lot of the stuff going on with Crix and his fanaticism and his delusion really was actually pretty interesting to play out. It just was not something that I thought had to be segmented off from everything that we read in the Adventures line. I think that would have actually really elevated the first half of the Adventures line. Don't get me wrong, there is actually a pretty interesting end to Crix as a character, but I would have liked to have that referenced in the High Republic Adventures line, and especially with the connections with Zine and Lula. It just felt like something that was just a missing piece that never needed to be missing like that. So all that said, this is definitely like a 1 out of 5, maybe a 0.5 out of 5 for me. It was only salvaged by seeing some of the interesting things with Crix, but it's definitely my number 10 out of 10 for our list here for the High Republic Phase 3 comics.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything you said. This was a really difficult comic to read, really difficult one to look at. It just didn't flow. It didn't have anything really interesting, unique, or fun to it. It's the type of story that just says, hey, Star Wars has quippy characters. Let's make a quippy character who just does the exact things you're expecting a scoundrel quippy character to do. There's nothing added here, nothing interesting. I just didn't like reading this really at all. And the art was so bad. It did feel like a secondary story. It just didn't feel like something they took seriously, that the creators took seriously. It felt like they were trying to find a way to reintroduce Crash because they wanted to use Crash in the Phase 3 Adventures comics, and they knew nobody would know who she was unless you read Midnight Horizon. And so they were trying to do that. It didn't work. I didn't think the series was very good. And so for me, it's a 1 out of 5 as well. It's also last place on my list. It's too bad because it could have been better. Like you said, the Crix stuff really should have been in Adventures Phase 3. Crix being on the same level as Zine and Lula. Crix also being a childhood friend of Zine. There was emotional connection to him. When you get to Phase 3 Adventures and you have the Warden, there's just no emotional attachment. And so it really made for a completely hollow side of the villains this time versus Phase 1. Next up, we have Edge of Balance, and we're going to first just talk about Edge of Balance Volumes 3 and 4 here. So Edge of Balance Volumes 3 and 4 I thought were an improvement over Volumes 1 and 2. Volume 1 was not a big fan of. Volume 2 was better because it had a little bit more stakes to it, but the characters were still just very dull. And here, those characters are starting to evolve a little bit. They're becoming a little bit more lifelike. Lily is becoming a little bit more entertaining and fun and less boring. I still love her katana sabers, and the art here is still great for both of these volumes. But Edge of Balance is just not connected with me too much. It's fine. I think it's a good series. 3 and 4 get better and better. 4 is my favorite volume of the whole thing besides Precedent, which is one of the spin-offs from Phase 2. It gets better and better and builds to a nice climax. It builds to nice outcomes for all these characters. But I would have liked it if the series overall could have done a little bit more to elevate it. By the time we get to 3 and 4, it feels like, okay, I'm not really in, and this is getting me a little more in, but not necessarily all the way there. So I ranked Edge of Balance Volumes 3 and 4 as my 5th favorite from High Republic Phase 3. I gave them a 3.25 overall. I'd probably give Volume 4 a 3.5. I thought that was very solid, but Volume 3 was probably about a 3 out of 5, so that's where it levels out. Better, but still, I wish it could have been great.
I have a lot of similar thoughts for these two issues of Edge of Balance. Lily is definitely now more a fully fleshed character. Obviously, we've seen with Precedent, everything going on with Arkoff and the ZZ droid. It's nice to see those kind of characters be folded in more fully with backstories here. All that stuff was quite good, but again, Volume 3 is set up for everything kind of going on. If anything, the main reason to read this is to understand why like the Drengir have kind of been activated again. Here, kind of seeing them be brought back actually does help, especially if you read Into the Light, where they kind of disappear out of nowhere and then they're just wrapped up in one book. Here you have a better understanding of what exactly is going on. The connections being made to the Blight are quite important for them too, and actually convey a lot of really important information to characters like Lily that are kind of disconnected from everything going on from the rest of the galaxy. Pairs quite well with some of the Audible originals too. 2 justifies a little bit more what's going on with the Drenker and why they had to be reintroduced in phase 3, even if I don't think that was necessarily needed. 4 is really where all out action goes. We get to see a lot more interesting characters like Reith and Aslan kind of show up and really elevate the storytelling be told here. But I will at least appreciate having some more Bunchian action. They're cute. They make sense for this sort of medium. Having a little bit more about the wildlife and how the younglings are kind of coming into play here. How everybody's kind of grown up since phase 1 a bit more, has taken their next steps and understanding their place in this conflict. I think was quite smart. They're not trying to necessarily play catch up like they were in phase 1. Now they're kind of more firmly being like, yeah, we are different and let's be that way. So for me, I also gave this a 3.25 out of 5, and it came in for me as my number 4 out of 10. Next up, we have the Saber for Hire miniseries from Kevin Scott. This is dealing with the character of Ty Yorick. Obviously, kind of comes to more public attention with the Rising Storm, and then the Monster of Temple Peak graphic novel turned miniseries wasn't super great. You can check out our thoughts there in phase 1, but I will say Saber for Hire is a big step up. It obviously deals with her kind of being hired out to help get back Lena So's son trapped behind the wall of the Occlusion Zone. And, I just found it more interesting to kind of have her with her ward of sorts, have her be a bit more banterous, have a little bit more liveliness to her, having more of her backstory fleshed out and built off of what was actually introduced there, making that part of her challenge, her foe there with Sababa. I thought that was actually quite strong. It definitely also plays into the whole concept of the Children of the Storm. That's kind of done a little bit earlier on in the Marvel mainline, but then kind of thrown away for the most part. This is a series because it's only 4 issues. You really get to hone in on one specific one, the weight of that on a personal level, what exactly Bullen has been able to achieve and cause traumatic transformation with these subjects, and having it be so personal to Ty, I thought was a smart move. Overall, it's nothing super crazy as a story, but I did like the action quite a bit. I thought there's a liveliness and it doesn't overstay its welcome for me. So for that reason, I give it a 3.25 out of 5, and I list it as my number 5 out of 10 on this list.
Yeah, I was surprised by Saber for Hire. I had zero expectations, wasn't a huge fan of Monster of Temple Peak, but Saber for Hire was a lot more focused. This was a story that was more centered around the relationship between Druin and Ty, and the way Ty starts to break down her barriers and let people in and become the Ty Yorick kind of Jedi that she, even though she's not part of the Jedi Order, she's starting to re-embrace some of those ideals, the mentality of helping the helpless and letting people look at the Jedi as saviors and heroes. She's starting to embrace that hero role rather than the anti-hero mercenary role that she was kind of stuck on before. So I thought this does a good job of elevating her character, leading in to what we get later with her in Trials of the Jedi. Druin was a lot better in this. It did pick up another hanging plot thread with Kip, who was kind of just stranded out there for a while. We had heard a lot about Kip in the novels, and here you get to pick up that plot thread. It was nice. Also carries into Trials with the ending of this. So there are a lot of things that I thought were pretty surprising about this series. And when I was going through these series, this was one I was absolutely not looking forward to reading, and it consistently made me excited to pick up the next issue because it was so good. So I gave this a 3.5 out of 5, much improved from the previous entry for this series, and I ranked it as my 3rd favorite overall from Phase 3 comics. Next up, we're going to be talking about Echoes of Fear. Echoes of Fear was written by George Mann, and it is very much so tied in to Tears of the Nameless, which is George Mann's YA novel. Echoes of Fear was one of my favorites of this entire Phase 3 run. The art is gorgeous in all of these issues, but especially that first issue, which is about an ancient Sith myth. And I thought the idea of taking all these myths and histories and using them to allow Amadeo and Reith to inch closer and closer to finding the rod, I thought that was a great idea, especially when tied into the character of Reith from the novels. This was a great introduction to him and his companions in comic form, and I thought the miniseries 4 issues was great. It was snappy, it was fast, and each issue was interesting because it tackled a different story or a different little piece of history, and George Mann loves doing that. He's the author of the Myths and Fables series and the Dark Legends, so he likes coming up with these ideas stuck in the far past and legends of Star Wars. So I love that idea. I love the way it connected to this story. This was, to me, easily my favorite comic in Phase 3. I gave it a 4 out of 5. It's so good, and if you haven't checked it out, definitely definitely check it out.
Yeah, I was actually quite a big fan of Echoes of Fear. Obviously, it's such a great tie-in with Tears of the Nameless. George Mann definitely gave it a lot of juice there, so why not continue here with a comic series? That first issue has such great art. It's fantastic. It's so good to see a little bit more of these kind of fantastical tales be told, also in a very visually dynamic way. There's always kind of rigidity that's there with a lot of these Marvel issues, and this one surprised me. Obviously, you really can't keep that up moving forward, and it doesn't really tie in for the purposes of the plot there, but still seeing all of these characters like Barnabas Vim, that story that started with Quest of the Jedi, happening in phase two. Now you get to have a bit of an anchor point. You have a better understanding of what exactly he was looking for, what he was able to achieve. You get to see the Pathfinders from phase two, which a super underplayed part of phase two being called Quest of the Jedi. I think it was a really important to actually see what it's like for them to be these rangers on the Western Front sort of feeling. All that was really cool. Doesn't overstay its welcome. It ties in super well. Now you have the Echo Stone fully uncovered, and it becomes a pretty important thing, at least visually, for understanding what exactly is being used and harnessed by Reed, by Aslan, in Trials of the Jedi. So a great, nice 1-2 punch with Tears of the Nameless. Definitely enjoyed it quite a bit. I give this also a 4 out of 5, and I have this as my number one in my comics. Next up, we have Edge of Balance Premonition, again written by Daniel Jose Older. Not the biggest fan. For me, I liked a lot of the stuff actually dealing with Yoda as a character in the High Republic. He's always kind of cameoing in random parts. He's always kind of pulled back from having a little bit more major influence in the story in a way that I was really hoping for, especially by the time we got here to phase three. Still, I liked a lot of the action. I liked the depiction of the Nameless. I like what Yoda understood from the lessons of other Jedi, especially Buryaga, taking a very interesting point of view for what the Nameless is experiencing and feeling, which definitely helps inform what we do learn about the Nameless by the time of Trials of the Jedi. All that was good. My problem with it is that it's not really a major story. It's like a spin-off of Yoda having to leave the younglings behind in the third and fourth issues of Edge of Balance. Once you realize that he just kind of has to have a story here, that kind of want to like market a story here, it's not bad, but I wish it was a little bit more expansive. I thought the villain was kind of similar to what we already got before in the second novel, The Rising Storm of phase one. Didn't really feel like we were breaking new ground per se here. I felt like this was Yoda kind of picking up the pieces of better written stories that kind of fit their mediums a bit more. I was hoping Yoda would finally have that one nice big piece, even if it's not super referenced in the book or anything, one big understanding that only Yoda, of course, would have unlocked. And I didn't really get that feeling. So for me, I have this more as a 2.5 out of 5. I wish I would liked it a little bit more. I just don't think it's very big of a story. And that's why I have it as my 9 out of 10.
Yeah, it's not a very big story, but I thought it was a pretty good story overall. It's simple, it has minimal dialogue, but it's got a lot of cool Yoda action. It's got some interesting stuff with him and the Nameless as he learns a little bit more about them, taking some of the stuff they learn in Temptation of the Force and applying it to his own experiences with the Nameless. And we see him kind of confronting the Blight in Trials. And so it's interesting kind of seeing that all come full circle here. I thought the story didn't have much to it. It's very safe, kind of forgettable in that way because it doesn't have anything to it. It is truly just the Yoda saves people story, but I thought it was well done enough. The art was good enough. All of the stuff around the story was good enough to where I enjoyed my time reading it. I thought it was a worthwhile volume of Edge of Balance. Not one of the best, but kind of right in that middle pack for me. I gave it a 3 out of 5, and it does rank 6th amongst my High Republic Phase 3 comics. Next up, second to last, we're going to be talking about Dispatches from the Occlusion Zone. This was another kind of anthology series, each issue detailing the characters sending a dispatch beyond the Occlusion Zone back to Republic space for Elzar Mann and Jedi like that to pick up. There are some standout issues of this series, particularly for me. It was issues 1 and 4 I thought were pretty interesting. 4, especially with the Ty York stuff, I thought worked pretty well. It does tie nicely into her later appearances too. So overall, really liked what they did there. The middle 2 issues are a little more forgettable, but I thought overall this story was pretty good. I didn't think it was great. I didn't think it was bad. For me, it's a 3 out of 5, and it's ranked 7th amongst all of the High Republic comics.
I enjoyed Tales from the Occlusion Zone, but after what we got with Shadows of Starlight, I was hoping for this to be rich and expansive to the lore and have a lot more connective glue. It did feel like a couple of the issues were just there to wrap up some loose ends of like, oh, we have to bring this character into this storyline that's happening somewhere else. Yeah, for me, like having a little bit more to do with Bridget and a little bit more of her understanding of her personality in the second issue. It was fine. I just was like, okay, we just need to also bring Crash and her crew a little bit more into play here, have a better understanding of how the Tarkins have already understood a little bit about Bridget and who she's become, embrace some of her more positive elements after everything that happened on Valo. I didn't necessarily love it, but I understood, like, okay, you're trying to make some tie-ins all around that are going to play off a lot stronger later on. The Emmerich issue with Niv Drendau, I thought started pretty interestingly, but it was just a little bit of a goofy fun and kind of just getting him into the adventure storyline more than anything else. Those are two fairly weak issues for me. I did like the fourth issue with Ty. My biggest issue was for Tay. Now we finally understand why there's like a blurb and a caption for when he appears in Fear of the Jedi without the Hand of Saber's. You have to read this to understand that. I love the art. It shares the same artist as Echoes of Fear 1, so that stuff was pretty enticing. I love seeing always more importance to Kiev, to Lorna, and all that stuff, so good stuff there. And that first issue, it's nice to just get a better understanding of what's going on Ariado. This is a good way to have these High Republic Adventures characters kind of give you a recap of everything and the power struggles. All that stuff I thought was pretty solid. Again, it's those middle two issues that I don't really care too much about. Because of that, I have to give this a 3 out of 5, and I drop it down to number 8 on my list. Last up, we have Fear of the Jedi, also by Cavan Scott. Includes the finale one-shot here that concludes the whole arc for Keith Trennis since their first appearance in Marvel's The High Republic Phase 1 comics. I actually like this. I think there's a lot of lore and a lot of play out for details that are first introduced in Trials of the Jedi regarding Battle of Ariadu. You understand how Keith functions as a marshal now in the place of Avar and those before her. All that stuff is pretty important. I like how seamless it does feel with what we read in Trials of the Jedi, and I think there's still some very interesting things. I think the use of the Children of the Storm here is much stronger than it is in the mainline as a whole. So the combination of that and what we got in Saber for Hire, it was nice to see some of that stuff be played out here. I liked everything to do with Key's final transformation. It's nice to see all the characters like Skier kind of finally fully redeemed and really take a step forward from all the pain and loss and trauma at the end of Phase 1. But again, I do not like that all the storytelling that is really important to understand Fear of the Jedi after the mainline is sequestered away in the Tempest Breaker audio drama. If you read it, that's great and all, but so much of Key's motivations, especially how focused they really become on the path that she eventually chooses in the finale issue, is introduced and fully more thought out in Tempest Breaker as a whole. That's unfortunate. If that stuff was at least recapped here in that first issue, I think I would have been fine with that. They'd really choose to minimally touch upon that stuff here, but for a comic exclusive character for the most part, for a character that has a crew that's been really around her since Phase 1, I want the whole story be told as much as possible in the comics, and not having at least a significant recap really does hurt it. That being said, I still thought it was pretty solid, but it does fall more in line of a 3.25 out of 5 for me, and that's mostly because I found a lot of that finale one shot to be a nice little summation of everything that I had read about the character of Kiev and Skier. But again, you need Tempest Breaker to really understand the full story and the weight of the story being told here. It does bring it a little bit down for me, so I have this ranked as my number 6 on my list.
Yeah, I don't mind as much having to do homework for a miniseries like this as much as I do the payoff of like Phase 3 being in a different medium. I don't mind as much that you have to read a different medium to enjoy this one, but it does feel weird, especially because you feel like you have the bookends, but not the payoff, like the climax is in something else. So that does sit weird for Fear of the Jedi, but I think what's here is still pretty good overall. I do really like the finale, although it does feel a little quick. Motivations for Kiev, we know what's going to happen to her if you know your Star Wars lore, but if you don't, kind of feels like it comes out of left field for her decisions ultimately at the end. Skier remains a highlight. I do really like Skier, and I did like seeing how all of these Jedi's worst fears kind of played off of each other. I thought it was well done, especially in the art. You get a little bit of a callback almost to those Drengir issues earlier in Phase 1, which had some really cool kind of horror imagery. Tie-ins to the Battle of Iriadu I thought were much better personally than Adventures, where this feels like a nice companion to Trials. Adventures felt like if you don't read Trials, you have no idea why the battle just ends and everybody's like, yay, it's over. But here it actually feels like this is the space campaign. In Trials, you get the ground campaign, so it kind of ties together and they reference some things in Trials. So I thought this was better handled. Overall, I liked the finale issue quite a bit. Again, I think a lot of that hinges on what I already knew about Kiev and where she was going. I don't think they necessarily did a great job wrapping up her character in Phase 3. Tempest Breaker is definitely the definitive Kiev story in Phase 3, but even that doesn't have the ultimate conclusion for her. It really is in in this comic series. So although I was a little disappointed by the way this series ends, I still liked it more than most of these series in the Phase 3 comics. I also gave it a 3.25 out of 5, but it is my fourth favorite, and it is that kind of finality, I think, that boosts it up, even if it was a little bit quick. But let us know your favorite Star Wars The High Republic Phase 3 comics in the comments below. What are your favorites? What are your least favorites? Do you agree with us? Do you disagree with us? If you want to know our thoughts on where these rank amongst the entirety of the High Republic comics from Phase 1 and Phase 2, check out our tier list. Make sure you check out our book tier list as well, and the timeline if you are new to the High Republic. We have a timeline that details everything from Phase 2, 1, and 3, as well as the Acolyte. You can catch up here with the High Republic to read all of these as well. Thank you so much for watching this video, and we will see you all next time.